They'll be discussing on democracy and technology, and we have Kuda Hove and Mallory from Privacy International and Center of Technology and Democracy, respectively. So I'd just like them to give a small introduction of what they do, who they are, and if they are very grateful to be here today, and then we can start the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for sitting in on our session. In brief, I am a lawyer who works on digital policy issues, specifically the right to privacy as well as the right to data protection. At Privacy International, I am a policy officer. So that role basically looks at how different policies affect people's rights online. When we say people's rights online, we're talking about both online rights like access to the internet, affordability, and availability, as well as the exercise of fundamental rights in online environments. So I'll be talking about how, as an organization, we work to promote the use of technology in a way that enhances participation in civil and democratic processes.
My name is Mallory Nodal, and I'm the CTO at the Center for Democracy and Technology, which is based in Washington, D.C., but I've lived in Nairobi for the past 4 years, and I'll be here a little bit longer before I relocate to D.C. About mid-year. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm a technologist. I'm your better half in this space. So as a technologist, I've worked with human rights organizations throughout my career, and mostly I find the perspectives and the experiences and the situations that have commonality across what I would just term the global South, for lack of a better word, really contribute to the larger debate. I find that has been very influential in my understanding of how or not technology can help with things like democracy and so on. So I, like I said, I'm a technical specialist. I work in the technical community on internet protocols and standards. So the idea being similar to policies, but if we can, for example, fix the code that's running, on the internet, if we can fix those protocols to enable human rights and to disable various infringements on those rights, then we are all improved, right? So it's not just about, have you got the most secure app on your phone? Are you using the right security protocols? We actually want to improve the internet's technology for everyone. And to that end, in addition to being the CTO at CDT, I'm also a co-chair of a research group at the Internet Research Task Force called Human Rights and Protocol Considerations. I'm on the executive board for a startup based in Montreal, Canada, that creates some of these technologies that either do censorship, circumvention, or secure messaging, that sort of thing. And then lastly, I'm a chairing advisor to the Freedom Online Coalition, which is a group of 31 governments around the world that was founded in 2011 to basically increase diplomatic relations on issues of internet freedom, on global internet governance.
Okay, thank you for that amazing contribution. I think just to open up the panel and so that we can have a very rich discussion, looking back at both of your different backgrounds, I think historically there have been, generally countries in Africa always face issues when it comes to elections. So from Kenya to countries all over in Ghana, they always experience either election violence and many other issues that come as a result of having elections. So I think it's important that every time elections come up, there's always that discussion of why is it that African economies are always affected whenever there's an election? And I think just to dive in, how do you think is the best nexus of trying to see what is the nexus between election and democracy, and in what capacities have you seen elections being aided by the use of technology?
I would just say that democracy is definitely larger than elections, but of course that's a really important component. Yeah. It's, representative democracy is just one pillar of democracy, but I think that the technically related issues in elections are, of course, misinformation, and just generally campaigning, but I think I would just include them similarly because, we're using the amplification in social media and group messaging platforms to spread information. And sometimes that's misinformation, sometimes it's disinformation in the sense that it's very much targeted to confuse and all that. And then the other one is just around the elections itself. So election security is hugely important, and then becomes even more complicated if you do things like e-voting, or even without e-voting, you might have, these days, you're transmitting results using the internet almost always. So that's like an incredibly important concern and relates a lot to cybersecurity and digital infrastructure, which is a whole area of concern as well.
I would say that one thing we have to realize is that whether we're talking about elections or any other form of participating in democratic processes, we are most likely to use a technological either tool, service, or device at one point or another. So, like Mallory is saying, it's very important to ensure that if it's devices or processes, those devices are secure and their integrity doesn't come into dispute or into doubt. And then the other thing that maybe we need to focus on is the policies around the use of these technologies in democratic processes. Sometimes you have people that get arrested, especially in Southern Africa and other parts of Africa. You have people getting arrested for the things they discuss online, things that are political statements, things that are fair commentary on what's happening politically. And you have those people arrested because there's issues with the laws and policies within which those people are trying to comment and participate in. So it will take a combination of both policy and technical input, expertise to bring together a situation or a platform where technology can be used to positively contribute to democratic processes in Africa.
To build on that, if you look at apps or software that have also been developed to aid the aspect of democracy, specifically elections, because I do understand the many facets of democracy that are not only elections. So in Kenya, after we had the post-election violence, there was a platform established called the Ushahidi, which was actually supposed to communicate where there's violence all around. And then they had an SMS platform, and you can actually map out areas of violence. So of course, this now aids law enforcement agencies as to finding out where exactly the hotspots are and how they can actually help victims. So then, yes, I do feel that there's a lot of positive energy or positive aspects of technology being incorporated into our democracy. And just on that, what do you think are the legal implications that may arise in terms of incorporating technology? You've already mentioned the aspect of cybersecurity and securing information and election transmission, but what do you foresee being a 10-year or a 20-year struggle in the field of democracy and technology?
So the first thing that we don't even have to wait for 10 years to see is countries like the United Arab Emirates, for example, banning the legitimate use of legitimate technology such as encryption tools and encryption technology. Yeah. So, for example, there's currently an ongoing ban against the use of VPNs. There's an ongoing ban against the use of even internet voice calling services. So if you look at communication, if people are not sure about the security of their communications, they will most likely change what they say. They won't speak, as it were, from the heart. That's why technologies such as encryption, policies that promote privacy are very important, so that people are able to fully express their political opinions and beliefs in a place where there's no fear, where there's no intimidation. So currently we're seeing a targeting of privacy-enhancing technologies, and we're also seeing a targeting of platforms where people actually exercise their right to free speech. Free speech, which also involves political speech or political opinions. And there's also even a clampdown on platforms that people use to access political information or information that will help them make better decisions when it comes whether to voting, when it comes to voting maybe for a law or an official or something like that. So basically, we are seeing an attack on things that empower the citizen to make a better decision when they now interface with government.
Mallory?
Ushahidi is a great example, but it's one of the only ones I can think of. They're really the concerns that I have, the things that I think about when I'm thinking about democracy and technology are mostly threats. I don't see a lot of opportunities, but I think that's kind of what Kuda's alluding to, is that the state is monopolizing power with technology. It's restricting use by citizens, but then it's increasing and it's expanding its use of technology to continue to have dominance. So I think that that is the sort of long-term struggle, and then what that looks in terms of 5, 10, 20 years varies. And so, I mean, my thoughts on that, I sort of break it into the sort of framework of the 4 pillars of democracy being justice, equality, freedom, and representation. So we've already talked about representation. That was your first question. So I wanted to just touch on issues that I see in terms of equality and freedom, which obviously are incredibly broad terms, but I'll be as specific as possible. So on the issue of equality, one framework that I found incredibly useful for understanding globally what the risks are is a term that I think was coined by the Association for Progressive Communication, who, full disclosure, I used to work for. They're based in South Africa and Manila, and they talk about digital inclusion. So digital inclusion, recognizing that not only do you need access to the internet to participate in daily life, like using WhatsApp or checking Facebook, you need it to increasingly perform very mundane bureaucratic tasks like getting your driver's license, voting, things like this. And so the risk of creating a digital environment from a state level without getting all of your citizens reliable access to the internet, you are doubly disenfranchising them, because 1, they can't use the internet like everyone else can, and 2, the analog version of these services is increasingly disappearing. So now if you want to get a driver's license and you live in a rural place that doesn't have access, you need to drive to a big city, sit in a cyber cafe. I mean, where there used to be at least a person in your village you could talk to get X and Y service. So that's, digital inclusion is a really important concept. And it implicates some of the technologies that I've noticed have been mentioned a lot in this event, which is like digital ID. Very tricky when you already have people who don't have physical card IDs, right? When you're talking about blockchain, I mean, try to use a cryptocurrency. There's a high bar for technical expertise to be able to use cryptocurrency. Things like 5G, it's going to save the world, but only if it works in the area where you live, right? So these are things that I think really implicate equality and are a risk to democracy if that equality gap widens. And then the second one on freedom, I think Kuda's also mentioned a bunch of these things like privacy, freedom of expression, and so on, but there's a ton of things that we need to consider in the digital age. Social media is creating an unprecedented media consolidation. Content moderation, you already mentioned, is a huge issue. Even the shrinking of our offline spaces is being affected by digital technologies such as facial recognition, mass surveillance, even targeted attacks that we've seen against dissidents and activists that are being leveraged through things like SMS or cyber attacks. There's a lot of groups that have spun up making loads of money selling invasive technologies to governments that we're seeing. So those are things that really restrict freedom, and I would say that that's why, for me anyway, it's a bit more bleak than not. Sorry.
I think it's good to have a pessimist in the room once in a while, and just looking at looking at the bright side and in Africa scenarios. So far, technology has been used to ensure more inclusion, specifically in election. So it has come in two key ways, and the first way is in countries like Ghana, they created a platform where it's called Go Vote, and you encourage people to actually go and vote and make very sound decisions about the leaders they want. So I think that's one of the ways that it actually has helped. Probably in 10 years it won't, but I totally appreciate your view on that. And the other manner that it has come to help is by trying to basically ensure that we don't have people voting many times. So in Kenya, we have very funny scenarios where you'd find an area like Tharaka Nithi has specifically registered voters, but the amount of voters who vote are actually way more than the registered voters. And so technology has come to aid that by ensuring that it's actually one person, one vote, and at the end of the day, going back to the spirit of democracy, being for the people and by the people. And so just as I close the panel, and I hope if you have any questions, you're posting it on Slido, please feel free to post the questions and the panelists can take it from there. But just as we close, I think Mallory mentioned very key issues on digital ID, which I have to mention is most of the amazing work that we do at Lawyers Hub. And so we've actually been at the front line of advocating for a very sound and inclusive digital ID, which is being rolled out in Kenya, called the Huduma number. And so in talks of that, we've actually found out that the Huduma number is actually seeking to marginalize people more. So we're actually using technology to marginalize and discriminate more. And in that scope, we're also having, we're also in this catch-22 where it's not actually a software made by Africans. And so how do we trust the data going there? And then how will that data be used to manipulate elections? And of course, we've seen scenarios where Cambridge Analytica has actually been reported to have affected elections in Kenya. And so just as I close, I think I just get closing remarks as where you really think the place of technology and democracy is, and what is the way forward on having sound democracy while still incorporating technology. Thank you.
We should remember that the offline space and the online space are no longer as separate as we think they are.
Exactly.
So the first thing that we need to do is somehow collaborate with people that are already on the ground working to strengthen national structures or governmental structures that are meant to promote democracy. So, for example, in South Africa and Zimbabwe, in the constitution, you have institutions that are created, and they are called institutions that are there to promote democracy. So this usually looks like independent commissions that look at elections, independent commissions that look at media, that look at justice, and different other democratic processes that make that country what it is. So as policy people, as technologists, we shouldn't shy away from engaging those independent commissions and bring our ideas and our observations to them. Secondly, I would also say that it's important to remember that if people don't know the power of technology, and if people don't know the legal framework within which they exist and live and work, then they are most likely going to be shortchanged by government. Think about how governments are structured in Africa. Most of the time, it's the ruling party that makes up the majority in government. So the ruling party's positions actually become government positions. And ruling parties have a vested interest to stay in power. So they will never, in the words of a former minister from back home, reform themselves out of power. So they will never empower people with the knowledge they need to remove them from power. So it's up to us again to come together with other CSOs or other organizations that maybe are not in the room right now, to teach them how to use democracy-enhancing tools, privacy-enhancing tools, so that we all work together and we all contribute policy, we contribute the actual bringing together of people, and we contribute to the safe use of technology. Because it's really a holistic approach that will bring together the positive change that we want to see.
So my take on some of the issues that I've already outlined, and then how to actually combat them, and what the role is of legal professionals and experts, is to really focus on government procurement of technology. So every time there's a technological thing, just as you've mentioned, with the digital ID, the Huduma number, there is a contract that the government has with a private company to create the software to implement the thing. Often the ideas that appear to be policy ideas are coming from that contract. The contract, and the company that's selling them the software is giving them ideas for how to codify this in public policy. That is where you can focus a lot of energy, is looking at those procurement contracts, and then also creating public policy that dictates the guidelines and the limitations of procurement policy. That's huge. Because otherwise, we are currently in a marketplace in which India and China and so on, those companies, even, of course, like the original, the OG, is the United States and Silicon Valley, right? They're creating the product, and then they're coming to governments who have large budgets, and they're selling the product. So that is something that you can really focus on. And then the other side, of course, is then regulating the private sector. Regulating the private sector is really important, and you have a very strong basis for doing so if it has an impact on democratic processes. I mean, it's a no-brainer. If this is going to infringe on democracy, you need to regulate, you need to create guidelines and limitations. I would just say that in terms of maybe some more inspiration about the larger question of how is technology impacting democracy, I would just say there are two resources, which after this I'm happy to put on Twitter. One is the digital inclusion issue paper that I mentioned before, done by the APC. And then another one is actually, the largest democracy in the world, of India. There's an expert there who also works for a human rights organization named Amber Sinha, who's written a book called The Networked Public, How Social Media is Influencing Democracy. It's excellent, because I think it really looks at today the current issues facing India and its use of technology, which is very widespread, on one of the biggest, most scaled democratic nations in the world. We can all learn from that. So after this, I can tweet out those links so you can learn more. And my Twitter is Mallory Nodal, just all one word, and you can check that out.
Thank you so much, Mallory, for the shout out. So I think also I'd like to thank the panelists today for making it and for having a very engaging and thought-provoking discussion. I come out of here having a lot of tweetable moments, like, if people don't know, they will be shortchanged by government. And I think, Huda, that's very, very important and thought-provoking. So I think I'll just close the panel now. Thank you guys for being part of this and staying in despite tea being in the next room. I really do appreciate that. I hope you're having a fun time here. And yeah, thank you so much, guys.